This is one of those Gospels, of course, that creates all kinds of questions and confusion as we listen to it and then try to apply it to our own daily lives. And I think one of the things that we make the first mistake at as we approach this Gospel is by using it as a guide and a measure for how to live our lives in this world. In other words, Jesus is not giving business advice. He is not trying to set up some kind of social pattern here by what he's teaching. He lets us know that right off the get-go. He says, the kingdom of God is like this that I am about to tell you, not the kingdom of the world. I suppose if we started paying people the way the landowner did, and we wouldn't expect people perhaps to work as hard as they do, or maybe come waltzing in a few hours late. If I'm going to get paid the full wage, then why don't I just come and go as I please? But Jesus isn't encouraging that. What Jesus is reminding us or showing us is that God is like this generous landowner. What does that mean? That God's kingdom is open to all. And in fact, not only is it open to all, but God desires all people in his kingdom. So much so that the landowner doesn't just go out in the morning and call once. Come follow me, come into my kingdom, come, be in my vineyard, and not finding all the people responding to his call, he doesn't just say, well, too bad for them, I guess they're locked out. No, he goes back several times during the day to find more and more people. And he asks, well, why are you still standing around? Because we weren't here. Nobody called us or whatever. And so as the people at different times during the day begin to hear God's call, they are invited in. And not only are they invited in, but they are promised a just reward. I suppose we can look at this in the course of our lives. Whether we were baptized in infancy or whether we were baptized on our deathbed, the same kingdom awaits us. And as we look at that, we may say, well, gosh, that's not fair. It's not fair that I live a life of faith and someone else lives a life of debauchery, and there we are in heaven together. Now, is that God thinking, or is that us thinking? And as the Master says, why is it not fair? Are we not promised the kingdom upon conversion? Yes. Yes, we are. But there is this temptation within us to unhappiness. We're all called to be happy. We're all called to ultimate happiness. We're all called to God, who is the source of happiness. And some of us realize that sooner in our journey than others. But no matter where we find that, the goal, the ultimate goal, is happiness. And God desires our happiness. And he wants to lavish that happiness upon us. And he wants to give us that goodness. And he wants us to share that with one another. But the temptation is to unhappiness. But it's very sneaky. Because as always, the tempter gets into our minds and wants us to begin thinking about other things. So rather than looking at our happiness, let's be unhappy about things that we can't control. What do we do then? We begin comparing ourselves to other people. Well, why did this happen to me and not to that person? Why does that person always seem to get the break and I don't? Why does this? Why that? Why am I not? Why is he this? And so on and so forth. And we begin to create these comparisons. And we do this not only in the spiritual life, but in every moment of our lives. We compare ourselves. We compare ourselves, maybe we compare our body type to what's supposed to be the ideal or the beautiful body type, and then we're no longer happy with ourselves. We compare our bank accounts with what we should have or what other people have, and then all of a sudden we're not happy again. We compare our fortune or our luck against someone else's, and again, all of a sudden I'm not happy. We're not happy because we've begun playing the comparison game. Rather than seeing what I do have, what is going on in my life, I have decided to make it a competition. And when I think about this gospel, one of the things that always jumps out at me is the relationship between the saints, Stephen and Paul. Now think about these two fellows. Saint Stephen was one of the first Christians to follow after the apostles. He was ordained one of the first deacons in the early church, and he was an outstanding preacher of the gospel, incomparable. And he encounters this brash Pharisee named Saul, who is very angry with Stephen for the preaching of this gospel and orders his execution. Saul causes Stephen to be stoned to death. And then later, Jesus calls Saul on the road to Damascus and charges him with being an apostle, preaching the gospel and announcing the good news to all people. Now, as Paul is converted and dies himself a martyr and comes into heaven, do you think Stephen's standing there at the Lord's side saying, "Excuse me, I have an objection. This man killed me, and now you're letting him into the kingdom where we're going to spend eternity together"? No, he doesn't. Of course he doesn't. Stephen would rejoice that Saul was converted and becomes a saint himself, even though it happened much later, and even though he bore the brunt of Saul's fury and anger. Nevertheless, he would rejoice in the blessing of the other, because the blessing given to one is the blessing given to all. Paul's riches were poured out for so many. As we hear in that second reading, I am alive. Why? Because of your good. I've been given a second chance. I would rather be in heaven, but I've been given a second chance for your good. The blessings that Paul received were not his own. They belonged to everybody. And that is what we hear in the gospel. The blessings that the master pours out do not belong to the workers as if they earned it, because they could never earn heaven. They could never earn salvation. So whether we've worked all our lives or whether we've worked in that last hour, we can never earn heaven. It is pure gift. And as soon as we recognize the giftedness of that, it changes our lives. And it's no longer a competition, but a desire. I want to be in this kingdom. I want to render praise and thanks to God. I want to share my blessings with one another. And so perhaps one of the virtues that we can cultivate today to overcome the temptation of comparison, which then divides and tears apart and embitters, is the virtue of gratitude. But not just gratitude for our own gifts, but to look around our community, our family, our friends, and even those who are not our friends, perhaps those we would consider enemies, to look into their lives and thank God for their blessings as well. To thank God that He has been generous to all of us who don't deserve a thing, and that He has shared His goodness with us all. And that belongs to all of us now as we work together to build up the kingdom. Because none of us has earned it. None of us deserves it. And yet God is so good to us. Why? Because He loves us. And because He wants us to be in the kingdom. Sometimes we're afraid that if God gives a large piece of the pie to someone else, there's going to be less for me. And that's how human beings think. There's only so much pie to go around. But in the kingdom, that pie is infinite. And that pie never is exhausted. And God can give you the whole pie, and there's still one left for me. And you, and you. God's generosity does not have limit. And so as He gives us more than we deserve, we We rejoice that all of us will one day find that kingdom. So maybe before you go to bed tonight, take a moment to thank God for your blessings, great and small, but also then thank God for the blessings of other people in your life, in this community, and even those who irk you to no end. Thank God for their blessings too, because that's what makes us good, and that's what's going to bring us to heaven. And with St. Paul and St. Stephen, we can rejoice with one another that we made it, not because we worked, but because Christ worked for us and gave us the reward we didn't deserve.